Hey, welcome back to episode 9 of Behind the Sessions for Wollen Retold. Go watch Wollen Retold episode 9 if you're seeing this before that, because this is just riddled with spoilers and behind the scenes looks into all the stuff going on. Um, Firstly, one thing I want to get out of the way, I did kind of shamelessly rip off Critical Role a little bit in this episode, which you can probably guess because it's about our little child Kinku. Quick spoiler warning for the early, roughly 20 episodes in to Mighty Nine, the second campaign from Critical Role, where they have, spoiler warning, they do find a small child Kinku very much in the same sort of regard as introduced in this episode here with Squilliam the Kinku. And there was named Kerry, and the party essentially for a little while had this wonderful little creature who was adorable, hilarious, and wonderful, and just acting as a nice organic little soundboard. That is just lovable and great fun to have with the party. It's brilliant. I think it's fantastic. I think it's such a fun little, just not a plot device, but like a nice little NPC to have at the party. It's just, such clearly obvious, easy entertainment. Well done, Matthew Mercer. And yeah, I promised I wouldn't make a habit of it, but I couldn't help myself. I had recently seen clips or highlights showcasing the funny escapades of having Kiri in the party at the time that I was starting to the week leading up to doing this session, and I was like, damn, that is just too good. It's just too funny. I've got to do it. And of course, at the time, none of my players had really watched Critical Role, so I could get away with it. Now that it's been broadcast to potentially quite a few people in the future, I am well aware of the fact that I can't shamelessly hide the blatant plagiarism there. So I'm just coming out and just making that clear that yes, Squilliam is very, very much absolutely a direct rip-off of Kerry. Because it was just light-hearted fun. I would never steal or copy or do any sort of thing along those lines at all. If it was a bigger plot point or a major part of my campaign or an ongoing story, the closest I've come is, of course, using Negan as an inspiration for the creation of Doris's introduction. But as I've described all the way back in episode 3, ironically, considering, back in time to episode 3 now, so it's all funny and fitting well into a perfect circle all back together. Um, I very clearly said back then, as I'll continue to say now, after the introduction of Doris having a very similar story point beat to Negan from The Walking Dead, from that exact moment after the introduction, I immediately allowed Doris to completely split off as an entirely different direction from Negan, his character arc, where he goes and what he does. I very much wanted Doris to have his own sort of situation going on, his own reasons for doing things, different methods, different stuff, different capabilities and personality. And I hope that is sort of showing through. I think, I guess, in the most simplistic way to just kind of narrowly describe the difference at this point of the story is that Doris, from the get go, has been blatantly a lot less antagonistic than Negan was. And of course, there's more to come, but I suppose I can't talk about that yet. So, what I will talk about is a challenge I face in the sense of wanting to avoid. I wanted to avoid the problem that comes with starting to introduce things like time traveling and going back in time into this campaign, because there's a lot of things that come with it, and I'm a big believer. It's not. I don't know if you can really choose to not believe it, but uh, the butterfly effect, I'm a huge fan of, and I do want that to be very well reflected and exercised to its most extremes every time I have the opportunity to in the campaign, because the butterfly effect is a very fascinating thing that I fully subscribe to, and I do always often feel frustrated by how much people who use elements of time travel and things in stories really underplay just how massively even the smallest deviations from the original timeline could drastically affect so many things, and it's fascinating. So, rest assured that if you share that sort of interest in wanting to see how wildly things can change based on even the smallest actions, I certainly hope that the rest of this Wollen Retold series will not disappoint you. One challenge I faced with it was when we reset, due to choices made largely by the players that led to this. It wasn't so much the DM myself was hard railroading, saying, right, I am making Doris wish to reset you and all will be well. It could easily not have happened, but because of how the players did things, what they chose to do, and how they ended up trying to betray and go against Doris, it only cemented the idea to do the wish and go back in time that Doris was already considering. Essentially, the players just made Doris' decision for him by foolishly listening to Zook and allowing things to spiral out of control so badly, so quickly. And with that came the challenge. The concern that I had was that by resetting them back to Session 3 and allowing them to obviously change their timeline, go on a different path, and do things differently, I wanted to make sure that the players did not feel as though the story itself had regressed backwards and killed the pacing and forced them way, way back, so they'd be starting over and to work their way back towards where they were originally. Not that I think they would have wanted to arrive at the same outcome, of course, but it's important that they feel like all the effort they have gone to so far in the story and all the progress they have made over the many sessions since Session 3 that they've just been sent back to, that it does not feel like that was wasted, and that it feels like this, including being reset now to Session 3, feels like an ongoing progression of their story going forward the entire time, and does not feel like it is in the more literal sense of them actually being pushed back. And hopefully, when you get to watch Wollen Retold as an audience, watching for the first time especially, that you also feel like the story is continuing to progress forwards, and it is still carrying on after the reset, as opposed to going back and starting over. So hopefully that comes across. Then, of course, there was the introduction of Kate, a fun NPC, who technically we found before we found Squilliam, but just, I'm out of order, sorry about that, but Kate was introduced to be multiple things, but one primary one that is the main focus of this episode is the first kind of toe being dipped into the lake that represents romance. Essentially not forcing anything at all. Kate wasn't just going to immediately try to get attached to any of the party members, who ended up, of course, being with Dane. But it was essentially, as we started playing, as I've said from the beginning, all of the players, and me, the DM, outside of one Jacob, who is one of our players who plays Dane, the dwarf so far, who had some, not a huge amount, but a little bit of experience with D&D prior to playing this campaign. Outside of that, all of us, me as a DM, all the other players at the table, everyone was all new to the game. You know, I think I learnt the rules about 6 weeks. Started preparing the campaign before we started playing the first session. We didn't have a session 0, not really. So it is quite exciting to to think that we've been able to come this far and have such a fun story. I think personally, as complete newbies, because I understand the average first-time experience as a DM and just generally playing D&D is not often as consistent. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for, as this experience is. You know, I think a lot of them fall off, or they go for a few sessions and something happens, time schedules don't work, or people decide to change, a new DM steps in to try something, and it's just all just a mess, a shit show. And I understand for a lot of people, unfortunately, that's just a reality they can't avoid. I feel very sorry for them, because I, of course, love D&D. The idea of DMing is such a fun, fascinating thing to me that I know I wanted to do it right away before I even tried really being a player. And I go to serious extremes and efforts in my personal life to ensure that I keep up the consistency of the game, and I continue to have new content and interesting things for the players, and I also try to go to a lot of extreme measures that I would never ask another DM to do so, to ensure that the game is able to continue being played over time, making it very easy for the players in different ways, which I don't need to go into. I don't want to risk sound like I'm bragging. I'm just pointing out that I have gone way further than most people probably should as a DM to keep the game going, damn near at any cost. And I might touch upon that in the future going forth. But all that to say, before I go too far off my tangent anymore, is that with us all being new players and new to this experience and learning things for the first time, there's a lot of things that I had not done at the beginning of the game, which I was well aware I might have been better off doing, and I figured, no, keep it simple, we're all new to this, let's just start a bit more bare bones and work our way towards it. If we do well, things go alright, and people are enjoying themselves, and the game continues on for a while, which evidently by session 9, we realised that it was going to be doing pretty well. It was still going strong. So at that point, it was like, right, I think it is time for us to start to open up more options and expand the depth of the game to include more things the game usually has prominent, especially in more experienced campaigns. So romance, which, and by extension, by trying to have a potential romance option with an NPC, is opening up a whole different can of roleplay elements to the actual the game. So that was introduced in Session 9, and as a common theme, Session 9 also introduces other mechanics and different sort of elements and features of the game, which one being backstories. In the week or two leading up to this session being played, I was going around and kind of poking all my players, not literally, obviously, but getting them to kind of break down, talk with me, and sort of digest the different elements of their character so far, based on the choices they've chosen to make, and from that, if applicable, go back and start to actually have a bigger picture of backstories. In most cases, just make a backstory at all, for there was completely nothing prior to that. We didn't have a Session 0. Session 1, we just kind of got into as free people, already being a party who had just arrived from Wollen, which I do think, in my mind, I imagine they came from the north, from a tavern at the coastline of the continent Saren, far north, but that's here or there. This entire campaign, as by the name, is obviously focused on the island of Wollen only, and the greater world of Felion. And it was really cool, much later after the big events of this session, to be able to have the players all sit down around a campfire and give some sort of indication to their backstories and what's going on. I thought that was really, really fun, sort of cozy and sort of a very natural way to get to know each other, which of course tied in with the first time ever, as you might be able to guess but just by watching the episode you might suspect as much. We had for the first time ever, we had two at once guest stars. We'd never had a guest star at all, but we had two in the same time come in for this one. These were these two new people. Golkak, the character, was played by, ironically, another Zach, and she was played by Quinton. And these two new players were friends of the entire table, who were actually playing their own game. It started roughly the same time that ours did. The Wollen, sorry if I hit the mic there, played at the same time the Wollen campaign started. They also had their own campaign going on. Almost every one of these, I think exclusively all of these people, the other campaign, unlike us, were all more experienced players who had done like maybe 2 or 3 years of different D&D games, if I'm not misremembering. And it just worked out this one particular time, for one reason or the other. I can't remember the full details. I think it's just whatever game they were going to do couldn't work out that week and it was cancelled. And so we said, hey, if you're free, why don't the two of you from the rest of your table who can't make it come join our game today? Which was really fun and exciting to do. I think I recall getting Quinton's character, for she, the same time I was talking to the rest of my players throughout the week, I think I also reached out to him earlier, asking him the same details, because I admit honestly right here, and this probably is going to paint me like I'm a much worse person than I am. I know this is going to sound bad. I am sorry in advance, but I kind of stole Quentin as a player from the other table and kind of permanently put him into mine, as going forth, She's character will continue to become a permanent, ongoing cast member of the party, for lack of a better word, for the rest of Wollen. And I'm happy to say he will play a significant role in the story, which is exciting and brings some new elements to it. So hopefully it'll be fun for the audience to watch, all of you. And sadly and unfortunately, because he was certainly missed, and to this day, it is sad to think that he is not literally able to play with us. But the other Zach, who played Golkak, was only unfortunately able to join us for this session. And obviously, he made a good impression. Hopefully, if you watch the video, you quite enjoy Golkak's character. And he was a lot of fun, and not a lot more I can say about anything for the future of a story or what happens going forth. But of course, the other Zach, if I did not mention, I'm sure I did, but if I didn't, other Zach at the other table was the dungeon master of that game. Hence why he obviously couldn't stay long term and went back to play and run his own game in the future weeks with his other players. Well, I held on to Quentin selfishly, but thankfully Zach was very understanding and he was okay with it. I did ask and make sure that Zach was okay with that and consented to it ahead of time, of course. And he was all down for it. It was great that he was also to come and kind of hand a torch over and see one of his players off and get to enjoy spending some time in my campaign world and stuff, because Zach and I had been able to talk about ongoing campaigns, because of course he being the experienced one, especially early on, I wanted to come to him and let him know things that I was doing and ask questions about how it's going. And once in a while I'll tell him something like, oh, I think I'm just going to try allowing for wishes to be able to do literally anything, and I might include some time travel, and naturally, as a good veteran DM would be, he obviously hoped the best for me and was very supportive, but he was also like, ooh, that is a big risk. That's a very bold choice you're making that could very easily do terrible things to your campaign. And I understood that and assured him, of course, that I was fully on board with that. And he provided a lot of help. In more ways than I can say publicly in this video. He was extremely helpful in a lot of ways in helping manage a lot of things going on at the time. And I'll always be very grateful to him for being just an absolute extremely supportive person. It would have been very hard for me to be able to manage my campaign for Wollen and do everything without him, is what I'm saying, sorry. He was a huge help in basically helping ease the other real-world difficulties and struggles and stuff that I would have had to be dealing with that would have made it harder to devote my time as much to Wollen if not for him. To be clear, he's not at all to fault for any of the sort of ridiculous crap or bullshit that I put in my story, or any sort of insane ideas that I had that could have potentially become insanely problematic. I did do the campaign myself. I didn't co-write Wollen with Zach or anything like that regard. Just to be clear, it was entirely made by me. But just in ways I can't fully explain. Very grateful to the other Zach, the DM, because he made a lot of things easier so I could make this ridiculous story without a lot of other real-world interferences that would have gotten in my way in my time. Sorry, I'm sure to anyone who is just listening to this, that's very vague, but it's the way it must be for the time being. So moving on, when we had these guys introduced, the main reason I wanted to snatch up Quentin, and it worked out well that I was able to also get Golkak played by Zach this game as well, this session, was that getting Quentin, and the essence of it was taking one of the more sort of veteran players in my mind at the time, who had a lot more experience, who I believe had done some DMing himself in the previously, taking him in, because just in the same way I introduced Kate for the sake of having a romanceable NPC, it was also fundamentally a key aspect that I wanted to start encouraging some more comfort for my players if they wish to. I was not going to force them into it, but if possible, I wanted to make the environment, the table itself we are playing at, feel more comfortable to them to roleplay amongst each other, to have sort of interpersonal conflict with the party, which, Zook did a great job of encouraging anyway, but to have a more experienced player who's much more comfortable acting, because of course, there were still some nerves around sort of acting against each other at the time for the players, and I just wanted to kind of bring them out of their shells a little bit. And Quentin, thankfully, as I had hoped and expected, was very much able to come there, prevent some more depth to a character that he'd made with like a pre-made backstory, which tied in well, getting these new guys, these new players of mine to make a backstory themselves. And I do think overall you can recognise a net positive shift for my players, and kind of encouraging them to kind of really open up their characters, really start to embrace the elements of roleplay, and having sort of just a more comfortable experience where they don't feel maybe a little shy around fully going, committing or being really serious, or using a really very blatant voice for their character at the table yet. Because I, as a DM, always tried to make everyone feel comfortable. I did a lot of big silly voices, funny characters, and be a lot of big acting. I was very much a big presence at the table intentionally, so that way, if I can do it, it's less scary for them to then kind of do it and kind of yes and improv with me. So role-playing with my characters against theirs worked out pretty well. I just wanted them to start to get more familiar with each other and feel more comfortable acting amongst each other as well. Quentin was a huge part of that when he brought him in, and thankfully it does seem to have worked out really nicely. Trying to think about other things that are really worth touching upon here. I think for the most part I've sort of enraptured everything that I want to say so far, as there's not a lot that I can kind of touch upon to too high of a degree. The fundamental last thing that really does kind of come up was the kind of what I'd consider to be the social experiment when I introduced the Frostwalker coming to collect, as a mercenary, collect Zook's bounty for the murder of Wendy Tuttle. Which, of course, again, I'm constantly reiterating that murder and what happened back in the second session with Zook and his turning point, and kind of really becoming a very memorable character, as one way to phrase it, for better or worse. But especially because I was aware very early that the murder hobo mentality that could occur in a free, open world, non-railroad sandbox campaign that I was running, I am not ever going to be against characters doing evil things or being bad guys, or just like having like a full campaign or like villain or heisters and sort of stuff. It's always a possibility that I will leave for the party. But if they're going to go down the evil line, and whatever they choose to do, I want it to be important that this world doesn't feel like a video game. I don't want it to be like a Skyrim or a GTA where, you can get some wanted stars, and if you run away or you kill enough people so there's no witnesses, it all just magically kind of goes away and never becomes a problem again. I want this world to feel much more realistic and grounded, and for that reason, when terrible things happen, like blatantly murdering an old woman who was kindly hosting you in her own house, be brutally murdered and have her important items to her be stolen for self-gain and for the desire of power. While if they are willing to go to extreme lengths to achieve that, I want to respect it and say, alright, you worked really hard, you made this huge plan, you put off this big heist to steal this gold, and you did all these things, you accounted for all these errors, you faced adversaries and challenges when you were actually stealing from the bank, but ultimately, through your well planning, you did manage to get away. And thus, I want to say, right, if you work hard enough, then I will give it to you, and you can get away with this evil action. But you must understand that the world is not going to just roll over and allow these sort of things to happen. The place, the whole entirety of Wollen alone is, a civilized place with law and order, guards, rules, governments. They always have means to prevent this sort of stuff from being dismissible. So I definitely wanted to continuously keep bringing back, really centering down and really hammering the point home that Zook killed an innocent person, and it is not something we are just going to laugh off, forget about, and move on. That is going to have staying consequence. If you have done something to that extreme, this is not a video game world. You will continuously be remembered, your face will be on posters, you'll be being hunted for. People will not stop looking for you. And that especially is the case because he left that witness, the young girl that frankly, I am relieved he did not murder in the crowd when he realized he was being watched. But he did leave a witness, and for that reason, his face got out there associated with the crime, and all that follows has followed. So the social experiment, so to speak, was just seeing whether or not the players would, at this point, after everything Zook had done, whether or not they would be willing to do anything, whether fully fight and defend him from this Frostwalker, we don't know, or if they just make a smaller effort to try and convince or talk the way out of the situation. But I really was surprised. And I fully appreciate player agency. I respect the freedom they had to do this. I was just a little surprised that they didn't do anything. The players at all, everyone other than, of course, Zach's character, Zook, no one stepped in to even try to stop it. They all essentially just looked to Zook and, had this mentality of, you've made your choices and this is where it gets you. And frankly, that's fair enough, and that's a very realistic outcome to the sort of situation when Zook failed constantly to treat the rest of the party well or to be understanding or empathetic towards them, and was very clearly out for his own intention, was using the rest of the party mostly to his own personal tools and wanted to think himself a puppet master. So the consequences came for him, and it is a fitting end to his character as far as we know so far. And I sometimes wonder as a DM if perhaps there was other ways I could have approached that situation. But I always come back to the fact that because of the freedom I allow my players to have, one of my players very early on was able to use his character and the freedom that I allowed him to have in order to make a very distinctive choice that he was fully aware he was making and consenting to making at the time, well aware there could be consequences for it. And that was killing an old lady, taking a staff of fire, and then continuing to enjoy a power and god complex throughout all the shenanigans that then follow between his death and resurrections. And so for that same logic, I also have to, if I respected his choice to do something that heinous, then I must also respect the rest of my players' choices to then use their freedom not to try and help the mass murderer that has largely been a massive liability to them. And that ultimately is where I always come back to. I'm trying to keep myself as a DM somewhat out of the actual fundamental story. I don't weigh in with my own personal opinions at the table as much as possible about the NPCs, the ongoing story. A lot of the situations I propose are usually a bit more morally grey, and I never weigh in my opinion one way or the other. I simply allow that decision to always be come to by the players. I try to act more like a video game engine that is simply the platform to run the game for the players to actually interact with and sort of cause change and effect to occur, as opposed to feeling like I am another player there or a developer who has come to sit in your house when you're playing their game you brought and making comments and criticisms and critiques on everything that you do when you play the game that you designed for them to enjoy. Hence that being the overall arching reason why I choose just going to stand out of it and just going to let it be. And that essentially comes like that. I realise the situation I've just talked about does not really have the most perfect answer. I'm never entirely sure, and I have no idea how other DMs feel about this. I assume it is a rope that most DMs find themselves balancing upon, of trying to find out how much or how little to kind of have influence over how the party and the players choose to interact with each other. Because I think at a certain point I could be more involved, but I think it's always better to kind of stand back and allow them to kind of figure out their choices themselves. And I'm never going to be entirely sure whether or not I'm making the right choice or not. But so far, it seems to work out the way it does. It seems organic. I prefer to have less of an influence over the player's actions when possible, and so I hope I'm making the right choice there. If you do want to comment on this video, if you have the same sort of experience as a DM or as a player of your own opinions about this, I actually would very much like to hear that, because that is quite the interesting sort of discussion that could be had. And to be clear, I'm not just saying that rubbish for the sake of, to the typical YouTuber who might be saying it and being like, hey, comment on this video what you think, because ultimately it helps the analytics and also gets like more, I don't know, attention and interactivity for their videos. I truly am asking you to comment because I very sincerely actually do want to hear a bit of discussion if anyone wants to weigh on that opinion. So, yeah. Beyond that, I'm sorry, I know this one's going to be going on for a while. Hopefully we discussed some interesting things that gave some food for thought, that this was more entertaining, as opposed to just listening to a guy just rebel on. I'm just trying to think over everything else that happened in the session, anything to bring up. Obviously we had Valentine and the whole thing there with the big sort of interesting party thing. I thought it was nice to have a light-hearted, fun, brevity sort of session following sort of like the more darker tone that some of the last episodes have been kind of slowly taking on, with everything that's getting a little more serious and heated with like Doris. And of course, why I wanted to have this sort of fun lightheartedness, so it was a good introduction for the players, the new guest stars, to like kind of come in and kind of get familiar and just kind of a thing, and so that way the early part, first half of this session could be a lot more sort of warm and fuzzy, a lot more fun, lighthearted, more time for them to interact with each other, role-play and have a bit of fun. It was also nice to be able to say, like, later on, right, once I've done that and they've all kind of bonded and got to know each other, then they can all come together because it becomes a primary threat they still need to deal with, and then the more serious second half, including combat, can kind of incur after we had an introduction period. And even better, for what largely may feel at times a bit like a filler episode to some extent, which I'm not thrilled at the idea of. I think Session 5 was a better example of what closer to what a filler episode could feel like, so to speak. But I like how this naturally ties right back in at the very end after they've got their triumph, they feel like they've succeeded, they've done well, they have had success to some degree. They still have to deal with the sudden raising of the army as the Gravelord is reached out to by Valentine. And of course, the Gravelord, as we've seen previously, is seemingly presenting an ongoing threat to carry forth and be of significance to the main story. Thus, it feels like all the fun silliness we've had for a bit of this episode does still tie back in to an overarching part of the main plot. This session will matter. It will have consequences carrying forth and will play a part on the chessboard towards whatever this whole story is building towards, which I hope you're all looking forward to seeing. So with that being the case, me going over that in extreme detail, thank you for listening if you got that far, very kind of you. Sorry for the slightly longer video. Hope you enjoyed, and of course I will be seeing you next time as we get closer and closer towards the big ol' finale soon in the horizon. Everyone take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.